In a general kind of way, I think that we Westerners are in a bubble, right? And that bubble is individualism. Because we're in this bubble, we have certain ways of looking at the world, which seem completely natural to us. So natural that it really does not occur to us that maybe other people see things differently. And I do mean very differently. The premise of this book is that, very broadly speaking, and I know I am speaking, this is an incredible generalization, but very broadly speaking, my premise is that in the West, we value the self very, very highly, and we prioritize the self and its needs in a way which is very unlike the rest of the world. That is to say that, if we might imagine that here in the West, we have a self that looks a lot like an avocado with a very large pit. And we are very interested in developing that pit. We are interested in making sure that pit is able to express itself. And most other places in the world, and I do mean most other places in the world, and very strikingly in Asia, this is not at all the case. In Asia, the self that dominates, and again, I know this is a broad generalization, but the self that dominates is a self which prizes flexibility. In the West, the ideal is to be a soloist, like if you were a musician, right? Well, in the East, the ideal is to be a member of a chamber group. That's not to say that you don't have your own voice. That's not to say that you don't take initiative or anything like that. But it does mean that with every note, you are looking at the people around you and you are playing in concert with them, right? That's not to say that everyone is playing the same thing, but you are very attuned to what everybody else is doing. And that way of being of the world feels entirely natural to you. And really, it is inconceivable and very strange to you that some people walk around wanting to be a soloist. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And something that's interesting here is it's necessary when you're talking about this kind of thing to qualify that you're making generalizations because, of course, we are talking in big general terms. But I think there's something else going on there, which you talk a little bit about in the book as well, which is that not only is it uncomfortable for everybody to have their acculturated self called out as such, but also, I think there's a reluctance, like on the progressive left in the US at this point, to pin down the self in any general way to culture, right? We want the idea that it's completely flexible and that nobody can quite put their finger on us from the outside.
That's absolutely right. Well, because we believe that the avocado pit is what drives everything, right? And we don't like the idea that actually we are very highly formed by things outside us, even though that is in fact the case. But also in the United States, of course, it's all these kind of discussions are incredibly politically charged because, any kind of discussion of a foundational difference can easily be abused. My own view of this, people have asked me, are you supporting stereotypes? I myself am anything but a stereotype. And, when I look at people I know, they are anything but stereotypes. I think that the problem with stereotyping really lies with the people who stereotype. Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, and I don't think it's helpful to anyone to simply not say what's true. The objective truth is that all people really have both selves in them. Do you know what I mean? In other words, you have the capacity to be either self. And let me just say that, of course, we're really talking about a spectrum, but most people are kind of in the middle there somewhere. And also, people are situational. So, people really do react very much to their immediate situation. And if you are an environment that is very supportive of the pit self, the big pit self, as I like to call it, that is the self that you will be aware of. And if we were to run a psychological test on you at that moment, that is the self that, would be evident. And anyone who's ever, uttered the words East or West is aware of just, how big those categories are. And let me just say that, of course, there are, if you think about the East, if you just think about China, there are enormous differences just between North and South China. on the score, and I do mean measurable differences. And then, when we talk about the West, we like to think, well, it's Europe and the United States, but in fact, it's a kind of there are enormous gradations with, in a general kind of way, the levels of individualism going up as you move westward in Europe, and the level of individualism that we have here in America, higher than anywhere in Europe, and probably in the history of mankind, there have probably never been the kind of levels of individualism that we see in some parts of this country, and again, I do think it's important to realize that, within our country, too, there are enormous differences. And I guess maybe that's to sort of say that, the part of me that says, well, is this supporting stereotypes or not? I'm thinking, well, actually, if you understand the framework, the net effect is not to make people who are different youths seem more other, but actually to make them seem more understandable and more legible. And they're not just strange. They're operating on a different system, a system which you can understand.